Good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's webinar, which takes a detailed real-world look at how organizations like Sims Metal Management are automating enterprise planning to streamline processes and produce better results. During the webinar, you may submit questions in the right-hand panel on your screen, and we will leave time at the end of the presentation for a quick Q&A. Today's presenter is Andy Starks, Principal Solutions Man. Excuse me, I need to change that. Today's presenter is Randy Schmitz at Edgewater Ranzel, and we are happy to have Jim Clark, Group Manager of Financial Planning and Analysis at Sims, to join Randy. Randy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Joey. So today's agenda, we're going to just briefly introduce ourselves. We're going to go into some background of the implementation at Sims Metal Management, talk a little bit about the scope, some of the processes that were automated, the architecture, some future desires that Sims wants to use to continue to expand the adoption and value recognized by implementing and continuing to implement EPBCS, as well as some lessons learned. And like Joey said, we'll finish up with some Q&A. So my name is Randy Schmitz. I'm a practice director at Edgewater Ranzel. I've been at Edgewater Ranzel for now 7 years and have been involved with the Hyperion and Oracle Enterprise Performance Management products since Planning 1.0 way back in 2002 timeframe, I believe. And I am very excited today to have Jim Clark join me. Jim was a very critical part of the implementation at Sims Metal Management, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Hi, everyone. My name's Jim Clark. I'm a member of the FP&A team here at Sims. My background is in accounting, which is where I started at Sims 7 years ago. After stints in consolidation, internal audit, and financial reporting, broadened my horizons and took on a more finance-oriented role. So in FP&A, current responsibilities are around streamlining financial processes, budgeting, capital planning. And in FP&A, I think we're about 1.5 years old, so still in our relative infancy. Our first large-scale task was implementing a budget system, which is what led us to Oracle's EPBCS product and Ranzel.
Thanks, Jim. I also want to recognize two people that are probably listening to the webinar, but not don't have to deal with the stress of presenting. But that is Yasu and Vatsal. So Yasu is part of the Sims management team, and he was very instrumental in helping us to understand some of the models within the Sims Metal Management business, and then helping Vatsal, who really was the architect and implementation lead from Ranzel, to take those models and basically understand how to configure EPBCS to support those models. So Yasu and Vatsal, thank you very much for your efforts. We are where we are today due to your efforts, and it's much appreciated. So Jim, you want to give a quick overview of Sims Metal Management?
Yep, happy to do so, Randy. So Sims Metal Management, we're one of the world's largest metal recyclers. We have over 200 facilities spanning 20 countries. The company has over 4,500 employees globally, and our annual revenue is around $4 billion US. Core businesses are basically secondary metal or scrap metal recycling, as well as electronics recycling and curbside recycling. So we're listed on the Australia Securities Exchange, the ASX, and traded over the counter here in the US.
Thanks, Jim. And then just a little bit on Edgewater Ranzel. So Edgewater Ranzel is an Oracle Platinum partner, and we also work with Oracle as a member of their Partner Advisory Council, and we have 2 Oracle ACEs on our team. We have more than 200 consultants that exclusively focus on the Oracle Enterprise Performance Management and Business Intelligence areas. We do work with Oracle Product Development to help bring to bear additional new products and new capabilities within the Oracle EPM and BI products. And we have 20 years plus experience in the planning, design, and implementation of these Oracle EPM and BI solutions. So to start with, I just wanted to give a quick background of where SIMS was prior to the EPBCS implementation. They were actually in a good place. They had already implemented Hyperion or Oracle Financial Data Management and Hyperion Financial Management for their financial close and statutory reporting. So they already had a good baseline set. To incorporate financial planning into the original system, the process was to prepare templates, use those templates, load them with data, send them out to various people throughout the organization, and then have that information submitted back into HFM where the information could be consolidated and then they could do their reporting. So a pretty time-consuming process given the amount of templates that were sent out and the details oriented with them. I'm going to let Jim provide a little bit of color on that, their historical approach.
Yeah, as you can probably tell from the diagram in Randy's overview, it definitely was a cumbersome process. It was actually meant to be a stopgap process, usually using HFM, FDM to kind of feed our budget information up into HFM. It was actually put in place, I want to say around 10 years ago by the HFM wizard himself, Dan Maturo, who's at Ranzel. He's been a tremendous resource for SIMS about 10 years now. So the process itself, it met our needs, but it took, I'd say, about 2 to 3 months to complete. The needs at the time were much more solely based on meeting board reporting requirements, not necessarily trying to proactively plan using the budget information. So the way the process worked, it was actually Excel templates, hard-coded values in the cells for all the accounts, our different operating cost centers across approximately 40 to 50 reporting entities. So the teams in the field would complete these massive Excel workbooks, send them back into our consolidation team who would upload the data through FDM up into HFM. So there was no ability to roll the templates, like Randy alluded to, a few months process. Actuals would be coming through during that process, and unfortunately all the teams in the field would have to go in every single cost center, each entity, key in the actuals for the month that just closed. Certainly pretty cumbersome on their end. Now the benefit, like Randy said, we had the setup feeding directly into HFM. So we were able to use smart views, retrieve the data. We got to use Randy's favorite, the HS get value through smart view. And he loves that. So we used that data. We could see the data, but the amount of time in the process, the resource utilization, there's a lot of downside in having this view, and maybe the biggest downside was not really having visibility to the drivers of what was pushing the budgets over the finish line.
Thanks, Jim. And I think that is a key part, is that these were templates, so any modeling that was happening was being done in some offline workbooks and spreadsheets, and then being entered into these templates. So once again, certainly an approach. It was worked for SIMS for quite a few years, but certainly had some limitations in terms of integration and flexibility. So when it came time to look at replacing the current solution, it was also time to upgrade. So the project that encompassed really 3 distinct and major areas. First, the upgrade of HFM to version 11.124. So there was a migration from 11.122 to 11.124, and the guidance was make as few changes as possible. And in fact, that went very smoothly. The second major portion was, since we were going to 11.124, we needed to migrate from FDM Classic to FDM Enterprise Edition. So that was used basically to provide an enhanced integration platform, and certainly that was key to our what I would call ground to cloud and cloud to ground integration. So taking information from different on-premise systems into EPBCS, and then taking EPBCS data and feeding it into HFM. So that also went pretty well. That was a lot of work. SIMS has a lot of integration points, but the SIMS team did a vast majority of that work along with our Ranzel's integration practice. And then, of course, the biggest piece of this was to implement EPBCS. And really some of the goals of that was to drive financial planning down to a yard location and a product level. We wanted to leverage as much out-of-the-box content as we could. So in this implementation, you'll hear how we've leveraged financials, stood up projects to be used in a future phase, and then stood up capital and workforce and started to at least initially get those some value from those business processes through the use of new capital assets, as well as understanding the process that was going to be necessary to get information from HRIS and payroll systems to populate workforce. The other thing was to build and leverage common models. So there's various inventory models that are used throughout the SIMS businesses, and for this first iteration, we did build a common weighted average cost model for inventory handling. And then, of course, perhaps the last but most important guidance was to create an integrated driver-based approach. So in my mind, the picture that resonates best for me that I hope I can share with everyone on the webinar is being able to easily go in and change sales assumptions and have those drive through all the way through their business processes and models and see the results in their financial statements. And I think we accomplished that pretty well. So that was some of the project goals. Jim, anything to add to that?
No, I'm good with that, Randy.
Great, thank you. So from a scope perspective, what was in scope for this first for the implementation was forecast and budget. So the SIMS forecast is a typical from the close month through the end of the fiscal year, and then from a budget perspective, they have a nice option of either doing a zero-based budget or seeding from the prior year ending balances. Out of scope was a short-term forecast, and when I finish going through the slide here, I'm going to have Jim provide some more color on that. And then from a business unit perspective, what was in scope was North American Metals, the SIMS Recycling Services, and SIMS Municipal Recycling. So three distinct pieces of their business. What was out of scope was UK Metals and Australia, New Zealand. And there's been a lot of work done on these, but these will be really finished up in a future phase. Jim, you want to provide some color?
Yeah, so with this, one thing I want to call out to anybody who's considering implementing the solution, be sure to factor in the time commitment to validate the data. So Randy mentioned forecast and budget. We implemented this, we started with just the budget. Forecast we're actually working through now. And one of the I wouldn't say it's a challenge, we expected it, but one of the struggles we're going through is trying to validate the actuals. So just to give you a little context of how we utilize planning versus HFM, we kind of took advantage of this opportunity to try to go to a much deeper level in terms of, I guess, start with our HFM entities. Like I said, about 40 to 50 entities. However, we have over 200 facilities. So we set up children for all of the facilities to roll up into the HFM entity as the parent. That will give us greater granularity, yard level financials, facility level financials, certainly help in the planning process. That'll actually also help some of our businesses that may not have a single ERP system across the business. One that comes to mind is our SRS or e-recycling division. A lot of acquisitions during the early to mid 2000s, late 2000s. So a lot of disparate systems. They're actually utilizing this as an opportunity to establish a common chart of accounts across the SRS business, where it's not necessarily at the level, the high level that HFM currently is at, which is more to facilitate statutory reporting needs. So they're using this to go a few layers lower on the chart of accounts and have commonality across all their businesses globally. Also wanted to point out a few of the other items that we tried to go a little deeper on. Product type for statutory reporting, very generic in terms of what we report publicly. But we went down to lower level commodities, basically the commodities that have different volume or price assumptions, which are some of our key drivers that really allow planning to, and these models that were developed to provide some value for us. And so to go back to my main point, don't underestimate how much time that takes. We're still in the process of validating. we have a tremendous resource in Arpita, who's on our Sims team, who spends a lot of time trying to validate this. But it works well, the system configuration, because we're taking the information from the GLs, it's scripted up into FDM-EE, which basically serves as a conduit between HFM for financial reporting and planning for the budgeting process.
Great. Thanks, Jim. So from a business process perspective, from a high-level perspective, you heard what, as Jim indicated, the data flows via the different sources into FDM-EE. That data is then either goes into HFM or it comes into EPBCS, and that includes GL data from various ERPs, and then also inventory data from a variety of sources, including a data warehouse. Once the data is loaded, the assumptions are updated. Those assumptions are things such as finished goods, sales projections, intake and yield forecasts, and logistical assumptions. So when I say yield forecast, basically for every metric ton of scrap that's brought in, what does that yield in terms of other commodities such as precious metals, for instance?
Yep. Yeah. Let me jump in there, Randy. That's another one of our key drivers that I think these models certainly helped us with. So. Kind of like Randy said, if you picture a car going through one of our shredders, you have this huge chunk of metal going through, and it's not just the steel that comes out of the car, it's also some of the copper wiring inside and other precious metals that previously in the budget we wouldn't have visibility as to how the teams would assess those various components. Essentially, it's a big mass balancing exercise. So what are the yields of the different byproducts of that car? Similarly for our e-recycling division and for our curbside recycling division, they're just basically, we're taking in a few different commodities and we're splitting them up into maybe 20 or 30 different streams. So having the visibility at a top level, at a consolidated level to say, okay, well, not only is this your account balance, also having some of that statistical information that we can do budget to actual variance analysis on, that allows us better visibility into trends and allows better predictive planning moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim. So that's where a lot of what I would say the value or magic happens within the system. And of course, this is all done through task lists, forms, and business rules that lead the different business users through the process. And of course, after the business rules are run, the updated financial statements are produced. And that includes an income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow. So it seems pretty simple, but there was a lot of work in that second place. We're taking these assumptions and getting those yield forecasts in place. Anything further to add, Jim?
Yeah, I kind of just to call out where all the models are landing on the financials. So the way we structured our models, a lot of the information feeds into the income statement, obviously. A lot of our what we call metal margin, the sales and the cost of goods sold are coming from the models. We also, for one of the models, our North America Metals model, that's feeding in some of the inventory data as well. So because we're going down to that lower level of product type, we're able to get better visibility into our inventory and working capital needs. I also wanted to point out the cash flow. So in Australia, the structure is a little different than some of the US reporting companies. We have what's called roll forwards, which are basically a picture for PP&E, your CapEx additions or disposals, or you have joint ventures, your dividends from joint ventures. You capture those separately, and then that information can feed into the cash flow. And Kim Forrest on the Ranzel team did a great job of incorporating some of that information into a cash flow statement for us. And then she also automated some of the working capital and forcing some of the profits into cash, which definitely helps a lot. And as a next step, we're going to try to incorporate this into HFM and do more entity level type cash flow analysis, which we hadn't had the capability of before.
Thanks, Jim. So what it looks like from an architecture perspective in the new state is somewhat similar to what you saw in the historical view, but you can see at the bottom on the data sources perspective, you can see that there's a few more data sources in the HRIS and payroll systems. some flat files that bring in the inventory levels, connection to data warehousing. So those systems are important to feed into FDME. And as you can see, FDME is really the conduit. So even though the data comes in there, it gets split out and travels multiple places into HFM or PBCS, EPBCS, I should say. And then, of course, that's where the magic happens within EPBCS. And at the end of that, the data is fed back into HFM. And then via either EPBCS, HFM, or both, the data can be reported on either through SmartView or Financial Reporting Studio, whether it's the on-premise version or the Web Studio. I also wanted to call out what this looked like kind of from a cloud perspective, if you will. So I think it's important to understand that the financials, the projects, the workforce, and capital business processes were leveraged within EPBCS. So the projects was basically set up for future use, but we know there's a definite need to at some point to potentially have that take into consideration capital and workforce data as SIMS looks at their different projects. The financials really provide an integration point. So by standing up the financials, we were able to easily get the other business processes to integrate into the out-of-the-box chart of accounts, and then take that and then map it into the SIMS chart of accounts for to look at information basically in their account structure and their entity structure. So you can see that at the end of this, we've got the financials, the projects, workforce, capital, and then of course there are the custom models that were built to support the specific, I would say, drivers and transformation process for SIMS. So taking those raw materials and converting them into finished goods and all the financial ramifications of that. So you can see there that North American Metals is by far the largest piece of the SIMS business, and within that there's a weighted inventory model that we built and can be leveraged by other business areas as we move forward. And then for SMR and SRS, they also had very unique requirements, and those are built into their own models within EPBCS. So this is really a good case study of how EPBCS was used to provide the basis and an awful lot of value when you think about how quickly you can stand up workforce and capital rather than building it from scratch, and then how it all flows together to provide the financials for SIMS. Jim, am I missing anything there?
No, one thing I'd call out, the capital and workforce, it probably depends on your business, but for us, I think there is a little customization that's needed. Workforce, certainly more so than capital. I think capital, somewhat easy to input your new assets, so long as you meet the necessary system requirements, fiscal year reporting and whatnot. But the workforce one, probably a little more customization needed. And for us, one of the challenges is probably with most companies, for people on the call, data integrity, especially in Europe. So I think a benefit for us is that's probably a longer conversation, but in some of the other jurisdictions, we could probably plug and play workforce a little bit more, integrate that into our financials, and that provides a benefit for some of the countries, even if we don't meet the requirements in others.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Jim. So that's something that we see a lot at Ranzel. Anytime we start working with organizations that have a European workforce, of course, the Europeans tend to have a much, I would say, more protective view of their workforce, and how that data can be used is certainly more restrictive than it is in the US. So from a future standpoint, there are some additional processes that will be put in, some additional business units, and we'll gain some additional value from the out-of-the-box content. And then there's this very interesting volume price variable analysis model. So Jim, I'll let you talk about some of the rationale behind some of these future needs.
Yeah, I would say some of the additional business units that's trying to set up the foundation that we have for our NAM business. Now, each of our businesses are a little different in terms of how they operate. and even inventory methodology could have average cost versus FIFO in some of our different businesses. So because there's not that standardization, we have to tailor these models specific for other businesses so they get the value that they deserve. But the one thing that I'm finding, that we're finding as we go further along, is if we establish the most mature model first, which was our North America metals model, there's a lot that can be leveraged through the use of the different forms that make up the model that some of these other business units can leverage. So getting that first one right and fully validated, vetted through UAT is a critical thing. And moving forward, the one that intrigues me the most, probably a few of them, I'd say the capital planning process. We always did capital planning and budgeting kind of separate. So the goal with capital and financial and even workforce planning, the ones that we can enable, would be just having one single source of truth. Right now, could have different depreciation projections stemming from some of the different fixed asset subledgers. So people would question their numbers. They'd have to override some of the calculated fields that would be coming through capital business process. Being able to house everything into one area, that's definitely a key thing. HRIS, having consistency between the financials and the HRIS system instead of two silos, that's a critical thing, the single source of truth. The most exciting one, and something that I know Oracle's still working through, is kind of these what-if analysis. So the volume price variable analysis model, those are kind of, if we tinker with some of our assumptions, change them a little bit, more so for short-term planning, what kind of impact is that going to have throughout our financial statement? And it's not only in the margin for some of these drivers, there's also some variable costs that are associated with them. So trying to peg whatever that correlation is between different movements in volume. More volume means more costs. Could be more waste costs that are generated as that car goes through the shredder. There's a byproduct of waste that we can't unfortunately sell. If anybody wants to buy it, feel free, but usually we have to pay to recycle that. So being able to do those what-if analysis, being nimble enough to do it quickly, see it flow through our financials, that's going to be a key thing moving forward, key value add for us.
Perfect. Thanks, Jim. And then we also are working with Jim to establish a managed services contract, and what that means is that we'll take the burden off of some of the monthly or business cycle driven administrative tasks. So the Ranzel team will work with Sims to make sure that we're doing regression testing associated with the monthly updates. That's an important part to have documented and be able to quickly go through to make sure that as the monthly updates come in, that number one, to make sure that there's nothing has gone wrong to create a situation where perhaps something doesn't work, as well as making sure that any SRs that have been opened have been that have affected the solution have been corrected, and we know that. The other thing will be to help with the budget and forecast business cycle preparation, and of course we'll also provide some defect and minor enhancements services to help Sims continue to use the system. So as with any implementation, I think there were always some lessons learned. It's always a good time to reflect and see what those were. So you can see them up on the screen, and you've heard Jim already talk about the data, knowing what data you want to leverage and understanding the time it's going to take to validate that. Models, to me, it's very important that as you go through this, that you understand what models you're going to configure within EPBCS, and also understand how mature those models are. If you're constantly making changes to your models, and I'm not talking about assumptions or drivers, but you're changing fundamentally how you're budgeting or forecasting, it isn't always the best idea to jump right in. I would say get those models matured, make sure that you're happy with the results, and then it's a great time to invest in basically automating those. But to do it, we're going to end up reinventing.
I'll definitely echo that, Randy. I would say with us, we experienced a lot of scope creep, and Randy was a part of it towards the tail end, where we were trying to get across the finish line, and what was supposed to be probably 50 to 75% of our time turned into 125% of our time. And a lot of that goes to what Randy said is we had a few models that were ready to go, or so we thought. Still, it took time. We had to be prepared to systematize those models, which certainly takes time. But in conjunction with that, we were also trying to create models. This was an opportunity for us to get some buy-in from some of the teams, and they're starting to get excited, whether it was by choice or from tone at the top that they had to do it. Either way, we were able to start to get some models that will help us with our end goal of having better visibility. But we were trying to create these models in Excel while trying to implement the system, and that just created a headache at the finish line. Some of the models had to be deferred. Some of them, due to the hard work of Ranzel and our team, we were able to get across the finish line. But I think it's definitely best if you know your models up front, get them ready, get them all stood up in Excel, and expect to have some challenges systematizing. But before you start on this journey, make sure you only go after, include the ones in scope that are pretty well defined and mature.
Yeah. No, it was a pleasure to walk through those with you guys, Jim. But it's an important lesson to keep in mind. And then, of course, the one that you've already talked about too, Jim, capacity. Just know that you're going to have some key people that need to be involved in the business during these implementations, and ensure that those people have enough bandwidth. So it's especially important in my mind during the requirements and testing, but certainly as you're going through the configuration and customization of EPBCS or any software product for that matter, having time to participate in what I would call show and tells, right? We've configured this functionality, here's what it looks like, we'd like to get some early feedback to make sure that the quality of the solution is in place. So that's the other one I think we struggled with, and I think we both Ranzel and Sim struggled with that. Jim, your take on that?
Yeah, I think the change management process is a key thing. If you have to be able to elaborate to the teams why we're doing this, why we're spending the money, making the investment, what we're going to get out of it, and what we're going to get out of the investment in their time, and ultimately a lot of that the carrot that it's down the road. So making sure that the people who are part of this process, getting their buy-in is a key thing. I think we did a better job in some businesses than others of getting that buy-in early on and involving the teams. But the more end users that you can get involved in the process earlier on, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jim. So really, that's our presentation today. So Sims has used this for their budget, and we look forward to continuing working with Jim and the Sims team to help them continue to get additional value out of the system, or out of the product, I should say. With that, Joey, do we have any questions?
Okay, give me 1 second. First question, can you explain the value of using the out-of-the-box EPBCS business processes versus using PBCS and custom building this type of functionality?
Sure, I'll take a first stab at that from a technical perspective, and then it'd be interesting to hear what Jim has to say from a business perspective. From a technical perspective, even though, as Jim alluded to, let's just say the workforce business process, you're going to always have to do some extended configuration is what I would call to it. So if you're an international based company, you're going to have different payroll taxes depending on the country that you're at. So Oracle's done a good job of making that easier than it has in the past, but you can really quickly stand up these business processes, I would say within a couple of weeks, to basically help drive out requirements and understand organizations understand what data they would need to seed it, as well as what kind of extended configuration or customization you might make. So in my mind, they really do accelerate the development of those capabilities, as well as integration coming now kind of out of the box makes it a lot simpler. So in my mind, it's a great place to start, and unless you have vastly different requirements from what comes out of the box, I would say that EPBCS and the out-of-the-box content is certainly the way to go, and it provides a great accelerator from a technical perspective. Jim, your thought from a business perspective?
I just think it's intuitive to have everything in one place. It's one single website that you can go on. That's basically your dashboard. I think the term is cards. You can click on the different cards and set up the security access. Maybe Randy, you can speak to the security a little bit more. That's something we didn't really touch on. But based on your security, the user's security, everything you'd need would be right there in front of you. Whether or not it's financials to go directly into your models, go directly into some of the different financial forms, or if it's capital or workforce, you'll have the ability to go in there, key in what you need, and it'll all integrate properly, as opposed to doing things in different systems or whatever homegrown methods would be used. Just kind of makes sense to have everything in one package to me.
Yep. And from a security perspective, the security that's involved in this is very similar to for anyone that's looked at on-premise, on-premise Hyperion, Oracle, EPM products. So once again, from a workforce perspective, it's most important to have groups that can see certain employees within their area. So the security is fairly straightforward, I would say, to implement. But of course, it can be quite complex as well. So the real art in setting up security is balancing it and finding the right balance of enough security without encumbering yourself with an overwhelming amount of administrative tasks just to maintain security. So that's done very well through within the identity domain structure and setting up groups and then leveraging those groups in your applications, cloud applications within the identity domain.
Yeah, that's probably something else to call out as something to have ready as you're going through the scoping process, is what users you envision where. That's something that can be knocked off ahead of time, as opposed to once you're in the midst of the project, you don't want to be spending your time trying to figure out who's going where. You want to make the most of it, trying to build some of these models and rolling out the system itself.
Right. Yeah. So once again, as you're going through requirements, Jim, being able to look at it from a business unit or entity perspective, looking at it from a departmental perspective, looking at it from, if you need to, from an account level perspective, who needs access to what. Other questions?
Yep.
Joy?
Yep. Thanks for the comprehensive responses to that one. That was great. What was the overall duration of this EPBCS implementation, and did that duration change from the original estimate?
I wish it did. No, our budget cycle is firm. Mid-May, that's when we have to have our first business pass for our executive leadership team, and then give a version to the board in early June rather. So we, because of when our department was formed, we were pretty under the gun in terms of timing. So I think we kicked off with Ranzel, I want to say in September. And like I said, we were trying to get buy-in from the teams as much as possible. So we bit off a little bit more than we could chew in terms of these models, and eventually found our happy place and compromised with everybody on what we could roll out. But yeah, it was an aggressive rollout. I think it could have been helped if we were better prepared with some of our models. But then again, it forced us to start to focus on that. And come the budget cycle next year, I think we'll be in a much better place.
Yeah, I think it went kind of late September, right in through April, right, Jim? Maybe into even early May a little bit.
Yep, that's about right.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you suggest any best practices in terms of using the dashboards?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the dashboards within EPBCS are great. I think the paradigm is to be able to use those to really be able to provide, I would say, a broader scope or visualization of that of the financials, and then be able to go in and from a detail level be able to adjust the drivers and assumptions to really affect those dashboards. That's the way I see it. Jim, I'm trying to think where we use dashboards and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, a lot of our data, we do a lot of our reporting through Smart Views and HSGet values. So that's one of the benefits of planning for us, was the ability to kind of leverage our knowledge of Smart Views through HFM and actually be able to recreate the Smart Views, albeit with 3 or 4 additional members using the data in planning. So we could quickly retrieve once we're able to find where the data was, because there's so many layers of data, it can be overwhelming. But once you're able to find it, leverage some of the ad hoc queries to locate and visualize where the data is, then you can retrieve it quickly. So one of the key things for us, one of the benefits of and why we chose Oracle, was our familiarity with that. And I was pretty pleased to see the ability to leverage that with the Smart Views in planning to retrieve data.
Yeah.
Great. How would you evaluate the customizing effort to change the OOTB content?
That's a pretty broad question. I think in general, understanding, where you need to leverage your custom plan types is important, because you do have the same capacity as in terms of regular PBCS, in that you have 3 BSO custom models you can leverage, 3 ASO custom models, and then 1 reporting ASO model. And we didn't use the ASO reporting model in this instance, or we haven't yet anyway. So I think in general, the customization is fairly straightforward. I would say understanding the difference between configuration, extended configuration, and customization is what's key. And to me, of course, configuration is taking what's available out of the box. Extended configuration would be, let's say, adding an additional payroll account, perhaps for workforce. So understanding how to fit that into the EPBCS structure, so that you're playing by the rules, so that when monthly updates come, they don't get impacted. And then, of course, understanding where you need to take it and actually create wholly new custom models through your available custom plan types. So it's I would say really more of a, you've got to do a lot of analysis, understand the pros and cons, and know how to work within the structure of EPBCS.
Okay, great. I'd like to mention a few upcoming webinars. So Randy, if you'll just move to the next slide. Thank you. Additional questions, by the way, for this webinar may be emailed to us at info@ranzal.com. A recording of this webinar will also be available on our website shortly, where you may find a number of previous webinars posted. We hope you gained insight from today's webinar. Please visit our website to learn about and register for upcoming webinars, and follow us on social media to get alerts about upcoming events, training, and webinars. We have additional webinars in this particular series. Our next one is on August 30th, and will guide attendees through the process in which Poet and Ranzal work together, using the right tool for the right job mantra to unleash the true power of Oracle's enterprise planning suite, including Oracle Hyperion Strategic Finance, Hyperion Planning, including Workforce, Capital, and Project Financial Planning, SBASE, and Financial Data Management Enterprise Edition. This will be the 3rd webinar in a series of 4 that introduces Enterprise Planning and Budgeting Cloud Service, a simple and flexible Oracle Cloud solution, ideal for integrating financial and operational data across the organization. The webinars in this series also provide attendees with insight and real-world examples to help organizations take strategic planning to new heights with a streamlined solution using EPBCS. Visit our website to learn more about and register for these and other upcoming webinars. Thank you to our audience for joining us, and thanks to both Randy and Jim for sharing your knowledge and expertise during this presentation. This concludes today's webinar.